Good morning. Thanks. Welcome to the Who Cares, Why Bother presentation. Today we have Jennifer Ackerman-Haywood, who works as a columnist at the Grand Rapids Press. She also teaches journalism here, and she is the advisor for the Collegiate. So give her your attention. An evaluation is being passed out. Would you make sure that you fill that out before the end of the presentation or at the end, and then we'll collect them. No pressure.
Thank you. Well, that's a great way to start things off by telling me I'm being evaluated. I have two mics here, so I really shouldn't screw this up. I mean, if I have two mics, then, this is, it is a pleasure for me to be here today to speak to you about journalism. And I thought to kind of go with the theme of the day, I brought my favorite sweatshirt that I wore in college. My boyfriend gave this to me when I was 19. And I wore this all the time on campus at Central Michigan University. And for those of you who can't see it, it says whatever, my whatever shirt. And sometimes I put it on still because I love it. But when you're picking up your kids from school and you have a whatever t-shirt on or sweatshirt, it's kind of hard to explain, and people look at you like, you know, what's your problem? Because when you cross into the 30s, people look, I mean, apathy is not really becoming on anyone, but when you're a mom and you're at the school, people wonder. But today, you know, we're talking about who cares and why bother, you know, and our subject is writing. And, you know, for me, journalism was something that I think I was pretty much born to do because I have been interviewing people since I learned to talk. My mother would be unloading groceries in the back of, you know, out of the cart at the grocery store, and I'd be sitting up front asking the women behind us in line, how old are you? Where do you live? And my mom would be like, I'm sorry, she's a curious child. But I never stopped asking those questions, and I found a way to get paid for it. So now I get to ask people, I still ask people how old they are. I make a lot of grown women uncomfortable when I say, because in journalism, the first thing we ask people is their name, we get the correct spelling, we ask their age, and then we, you know, kind of get rolling from there. And for some people, you know, age is a difficult thing. But for me, journalism has been something that, you know, I've always just kind of, you know, like I said, I think I was naturally programmed to do this. But the thing is now, we're in a situation where journalism, as many of you know, the journalism industry is in a bit of a, you know, uncertain time. And, you know, how many of you, I'm just gonna start out by asking you this, how many of you guys read newspapers on a regular basis? Okay. Okay, now, okay, there wasn't a whole lot of people. How many of you don't read newspapers? Okay, where do you guys get your news? If someone wants to like just shout out where you get your TV, okay. Where else do you get your news? The internet? Okay, where on the internet? Facebook, Twitter? Oh, you didn't say anything. Somebody did. I heard a voice. Okay, so, you know, people are not getting their news from the traditional places that when I grew up, you know, we had radio programs, which I thought were really boring, and I didn't listen to news radio at all until my 20s. But I did grow up reading the Detroit Free Press, and that was my hometown paper. I'm from Metro Detroit, and this was part of my morning ritual. I would eat my Cheerios, sitting at the table with my dad, and we would, you know, share the Detroit Free Press. And I envisioned that I had big plans to work there someday. And life turned out a little differently, but now I think in a lot of homes, people aren't sharing newspapers like they used to. You know, the Grand Rapids Press doesn't even print every day. So we're definitely in a different climate for, you know, our journalism and the industry itself. But the thing is, you guys still probably want to know what's going on. You know, if you hear a siren down the block, how many of you just don't even wonder what's going on? Okay, would you say most of you want to know if something's going on? All of a sudden a bunch of cops are swarming your neighbor's house. You totally want to know what's going on. You know, you want to know, do I evacuate? I mean, what's going on? So, you know, there's always going to be a need for the dissemination of information. We're always going to need people who can go out and do interviews and get that story and do it accurately. And the situation that we're in right now is that, you know, if you have a website, a blog, you know, there's a lot of people kind of jumping in to the journalism field as a lot of the veterans who've been in it for a while and properly trained are kind of getting out because a lot of newspapers are downsizing right now. With newspapers, they were traditionally funded by the advertising print advertising. And newspapers are still struggling to recover from the fact that as ad revenue goes down, they haven't really found a way to generate the revenue that they used to get from that print advertising. Businesses now are just putting their story out there directly on their own websites, so they have their own channel to communicate directly with consumers. So newspapers are definitely kind of in this identity crisis. And you know, for me, when I started in journalism, I got my first job as a paid job as a journalist when I was 17. I worked for the Macomb Daily in Macomb County, and I got this job after calling almost every year I was in high school. I called the local newspaper, and I got the managing editor, and he would every year hang up on me because I'd say, "Hi, I'm interested in internship possibilities," and he would say, "What school do you go to?" Yeah, "What school do you go to?" And I would say, "Fraser High School," and then he would say, "We don't hire kids," and he would hang up. And this one, we did this a couple times, at least probably 2 times, maybe 3, and I just kept calling. And so my senior year, I called and I said, you know, I'd like an internship. I'd like to apply for one. Please don't hang up. I'm enrolled at Central Michigan University, and I'm going to study journalism. And it just so happened that a board member of Central Michigan's, a board of trustee member, was the editorial board director at the Macomb Daily. So, you know, this editor who had been kind of grumpy with me transferred me over to the guy. He's like, "Well, I know somebody who likes Central," and he transferred me over to this other man who did arrange for me to come in for an interview. And the interview was in a glass office, and there were about 5 or 6 editors. I've never been so intensely interviewed since. But I came in with an empty briefcase. There might have been 1 folder in it. And I wore a suit that was way too big, but I was working in retail. And I thought, well, I better wear a suit for this interview. And I wore high heels, which I don't wear high heels. I mean, my track shoes are over here in the corner. I don't do heels. I never really did then either, but so I kind of come in wobbly on my heels. And, you know, I thought, well, if nothing else, these people they're giving me a chance to, you know, just tell my story, and hopefully they'll give me a chance to be an intern. And they ended up letting me be a summer intern that year, and I got to do a Sunday column. And I thought, geez, this is exactly everything I've wanted, and you know, on the first try. But what I learned is that as time went on and I did other internships, I realized that becoming a columnist was not going to be automatic. You know, I was going to have to earn that back. And it took me 8 years at the Grand Rapids Press to get back to that column writing, you know, to get that opportunity again. But so the whole experience of going into journalism, I mean, when I got into this, there were jobs available. When I graduated from Central Michigan in 1998, there were job options. You know, I could pick from a couple things and a couple different jobs. And now journalists are struggling a little more to find jobs, especially if you're going into you know, traditional print media. However, you know, this is not going to be a doom and gloom talk here. The thing that I feel really strongly about, and I wouldn't be teaching journalism here if I didn't believe there's a future in it. There's definitely a future in it, but it definitely is going to be, it's more difficult for sure. You can't kind of skate through and just kind of take the classes, go through the motions, kind of get some clips, but not have a lot. You have to be exceptional. You have to be bring your A game. You can't passively get through a journalism program and find a job. You have to really work hard. And I think if the folks who want to do that, you know, because there just aren't jobs for the, you know, the A team, your first string, if you want to take a sports analogy here, your starters are going to get jobs. The ones who are not trying as hard, don't have a lot of clips when they graduate, those folks are going to struggle quite a bit. But when you boil it down, though, as far as writing goes and journalism, I mean, I think the future is bright still, because we're always going to need people who can go out and tell a story. People that can go out to, whether you're covering the cops in courts or you're covering sporting events, there's always going to be a need for the public wants to know. And really, when you boil it down, journalism and journalists, what we do is we protect the democracy of this country. I mean, if journalists don't pay attention to what our government's doing, what's happening at your city hall. A lot of you have jobs. I mean, how many of you guys have time to regularly attend your city council meetings? Do any of you go on a regular basis? Okay, I didn't think so. I mean, I don't have time to go to mine either. But you know, we have journalists who are assigned to do that and kind of keep an eye out. So if a mayor has his hand in the cookie jar, or somebody's embezzling funds, there's someone looking at that budget, an independent person, a journalist is doing that. And sometimes journalists get this bad rap as being like the vultures who go to the fire or the accident, and we're there and we're really rude, and we're just trying to get a story and win awards. That's not it at all. I covered police and court proceedings and breaking news for the first 5 years of my career, and I can tell you that I never left a fire or an accident scene feeling like, this is awesome, man, I had a great story. I cried sometimes going back to the office. And that's not something they show in the movies. They don't show reporters like crying in their cars. There's things when you write about dead children. That's not fun. There's nothing fun about it. But the thing is, every person has a story, and I felt like, okay, I'm not really loving this situation right now, but if that was my family member or someone that I loved and cared about, I would hope that somebody would treat the person's story with respect and tell people what they meant to the people around them. So you do these difficult interviews where you're sitting at a kitchen table and someone slides a photo of a deceased relative across the table. And I did a lot of these stories where I was writing about kids. There might be a drunk driving accident, and a kid is killed. Before I became a parent, I had kind of like this force field. Like I could be empathetic and I could understand that there was a painful loss here. But then when I had children, it became a lot more difficult because I understand what's at stake now. I'm a mother myself, and I can completely relate to these parents. But and while those stories were difficult to write and not exactly fun to do, it taught me a lot about just human nature. And I've sat across the table with people that were entirely different than me. I interviewed a guy one time who had a 12-inch mohawk in a coffee shop, and the table was really small, and when he leaned forward, he almost hit me in the face with his hair. This was a guy that had a lot of tattoos and piercings, and I was sitting there looking very pale, like basically no makeup, and totally different people, but we had a fascinating conversation. And I've been in neighborhoods that are different than the one I grew up in, and every single time I go out on a story, when you do an interview, if you do an interview well, you leave and you have this connection to the person. Like, you've been able to kind of hear their story, listen to them, and everybody wants to be heard. I think one of the one thing that's really frustrating for any of us is when we feel like no one's listening to us, no one's hearing us. And journalists tell those stories. We ask questions. You try to leave your judgment, back in the car. You don't take that with you. You're going to the jail to do a jailhouse interview. You don't bring a load of judgment in to that cell, or that they don't let you in the cell, but into the area where you can meet with a person and do an interview. You have to ask questions and recognize what personal bias you might have and set that aside and do a story. And these skills, these interview skills and these writing skills have helped me translate to other things in my career. The last few jobs I've held, I have not applied for. And the reason that I haven't had to really apply through regular channels is because I can write. I've been able to write my way into a lot of different things. So I'll get back to my story here just briefly. I graduated from Central Michigan University in 1998. And that guy that gave me the sweatshirt, the whatever sweatshirt, apparently that was a love connection because I've been married to him for 15 years, and he's a journalist as well. And well, he just recently left the field, but we spent the bulk of our professional lives working at the Grand Rapids Press, and we met in the basement of Ansball Hall at the student newspaper at Central Michigan University. And so when we were applying for jobs, we applied as kind of like as a couple. And that's kind of shaky too, because when you're not married yet, and you're applying for jobs, and you're like, yeah, but here's my fiance. Editors aren't really sure what to do with that. The divorce rate, even in 1998, was pretty high, and then people are like, are you sure? I'm like, I'm really sure. Let's just talk about the the job I'm trying to get, not my, my future husband. But anyway, the press was kind enough to offer us 2 full-time jobs, and he was on the copy desk, my husband Jeff, and I started as a night cops reporter. And I did that for about 5 or 6 years, and then eventually covered education. I covered higher ed. I used to cover this college here, Grand Valley, all the colleges in town. I've written about transportation. I've done some health reporting. I've done a lot of humiliating things. I actually consented to a photo of myself looking rather out of shape on an exercise bike. Gravity takes over, folks. And I had fat rolls I didn't know I had show up in this photo that was on the front page of the Grand Rapids Press. And, so I've had some of these experiences where, you put yourself out there and, I wrote this first-person fitness series, and it was actually one of the funnest, experiences of my life. It terrified me. It humiliated me in many, many cases because I was like, oh my gosh, I can't believe I've done this. But I started getting letters from people who were like, wow, I'm trying to lose weight too. And people would cheer me on at the YMCA, and I connected with a lot of really fun people. So it's been quite an adventure, and I stayed at the paper until 2009. I was on staff right inside the paper. I remain a columnist where I write now about art and craft of all things. And the funny thing is, if you think back to what you liked to do when you were 5 years old, and just take a moment to think about what you liked to do when you were 5 years old. Or maybe a little bit older than that, if you can't remember what you like to do when you're 5 years old. A lot of times, what you like to do when you're a child is what you end up doing or come back to later in life. When people ask little kindergartners, what do you want to be when you grow up? A lot of times that comes back, because when I was 5 years old, I was making things like this. I had some great aunts, and my mom was pretty crafty, so I was crocheting. So a little 5-year-old who was like training to be a grandma. I have a very old spirit. I'm starting to grow into my spirit. I am 37, and I think I was born about 85. I did a lot of crocheting, and when I was a night cops reporter at the Grand Rapids Press, and I was writing about death and destruction and depressing things, I needed an outlet. I needed to, the stereotype in some of the movies, you see that some reporters, journalists are portrayed as heavy drinkers. In some cases. In my case, that is not true. I'm probably too much of a control freak to ever let go completely. So for me, I turned to, fiber art, and I got really into weaving. So I would write about death and destruction during the day, and I would go home and weave rugs and scarves at night on a big, huge floor loom. Paid off my college loan and bought a weaving loom. So I was, and then I go to the fire wearing my hand-woven scarf and feel better about everything that was going on in the world. And and that's something I kept doing on the side. So as I progressed through the different assignments I had at the Grand Rapids Press, I was still making things all the time. And you guys might be wondering, well, what does this have to do with writing? And the thing is, it really has nothing to do with writing, but it was something I love to do. It was my passion. I like to make things. I like to talk to people, I like to write, and I like to make things. And if I'm not able to do those three things, I'm not gonna be a very happy person. So I could never really live in solitude, I don't think, unless I had a lot of craft supplies, maybe. But, so what happened is, as I progressed at the press, I kept making a pitch to, kept asking to write about art and craft. And it wasn't something that people embraced right away. In fact, it took me 8 years to get a column in the paper. But now, every Sunday, I write about people, I interview people about what they make. And I talk to people who make, this Sunday, I'm going to have a column about a woman who makes fermented tea. Usually, I talk to people who make, who do art and craft. It's more, painters and fiber artists, people who are in doing craft shows and things like that. And some people might think, wow, you went from the front page. And my parents actually one year at Christmas gave me this sweatshirt. I guess people in my life give me sweatshirts. I'm just now making this connection, but I have a collection. One year I got for Christmas a sweatshirt that said front page, because when I was in college, I was editor of Central's paper for a couple years, and I was on the front page all the time. I like to be on the front page. If there's a front page story, I wanted to write it. It's just, I'm pretty goal-oriented and pretty driven, and I'm competitive. I wanted to be out there getting the front page story. Well, now I'm not on the front page. I am in section, I think this last Sunday, I think I was I4, and I feel like I'm playing bingo, I4. It's not, I'm not on the front page anymore. And, for a while there, it was a little bit strange, because you kind of feel like, geez, what have I done? What have I done to my career? Did I totally blow it up with like crochet hooks and knitting needles and all this kind of stuff? But the cool part is, it's created this it's freedom, basically, because I can write every Sunday about whatever I want. And I get to go and talk to people about what they love. So people aren't crying. Well, sometimes they cry. I don't have a Barbara Walters approach where I try to go for the tears. I'm not trying to make people cry, but sometimes they'll tell me a story of how they came to make what they make, or to get to the point they're at right then. And there's sometimes people are, it's a pretty emotional thing, but I'm not on the front page anymore, and I couldn't be happier though, because I really get to write about things that are, fun for people, and I get to interview people about their passion, and that's always a lot of fun to do. So because, I kind of stuck with writing, because, in about 2007, 2008, the talk around my newsroom was pretty dire. A lot of us were getting kind of worried. When I was at Central, I was not thinking about, well, what am I going to do when the bottom falls out of my industry? What am I going to do when everyone's running around the newsroom with their hands above their head, like the sky's falling? I didn't think about that, because I'm like, I love journalism. Journalism's going to be here forever. And I didn't think about how the internet was going to change everything about it. So another thing that I did to kind of expand my own skill set is I started a podcast, and my timing was terrible because I had just had 2 children, and 18 months apart. And so when I was on maternity leave with my second child, I was talking to my husband. Well, I was trying to, but he had one earbud in his ear, and the other was dangling down. And I said, "Are you even listening to me? That thing that women do sometimes to their significant others. Are you even listening?" And we were both exhausted. We had 2 little kids, and I said, "What are you even listening to?" And he told me it was a tech podcast. And I said, "Tech podcast?" I said, "That sounds so boring." And it was about Mac computers, and I just thought, this is I cannot believe you'd rather listen to that than your wife about, But anyway, he played me a little bit of this tech podcast. So I listened to a little bit, and I'm like, yeah, that's really boring. And he's like, well, you should do one about crafts, about art and craft. And I said, no, I don't think I'm going to do that. And then right as I said that, I pretty much decided instantly, I'm like, no, I'm totally going to do that. And the thing is, I kind of exist with this thing, and if you learn one thing from me, I think you should have more realistic outlook about what you can actually accomplish in a day, because I have a very unrealistic perspective of that. I wake up in the morning, I'm like, I can do everything today. I can write a bunch of stories, I can interview a bunch of people, and obviously you can't do all that in one day, but I try every day. I wake up and I try to do more than humanly possible in a day. And with this podcast, I called up this woman, or emailed this woman in California. She had a website called Monster Crochet, and she crocheted like monsters and like just really funky things like eyeballs and like weird stuff. And I emailed her and said, hey, I'm starting a podcast and I'd like to interview you. I didn't really know much about her, but I thought she'd be interesting. I'll do this interview. And the first episode was a complete disaster. It was horrifying. I wrote all these questions, and I never, even when I interview people in print, I never write out questions. I got really nervous. I was afraid of the microphone I was using. I was very awkward. My husband said, hey, you talk really fast, so for your podcast, you should talk slowly. And I'm like, okay, well, good to know. But so I talked like, hi, I'm Jennifer. And I sounded like I was like on muscle relaxers or something. I didn't sound like myself. And I sounded like there could be possibly something, I might have been having some kind of medical experience at the time. Like I was having some kind of, episode or something. It just didn't sound like me. The woman I interviewed was fine. She did fine. But unfortunately for her, she didn't get me at my best podcasting moment. But we put this, I forged ahead, and I don't know why, honestly, because it was I can't listen to that first episode. It's still out there on the internet, but the cringe factor is too high. I just want to hide forever if I listen to that, so I'll never listen to it again. But I left it out there to give people hope, because you can be kind of shaky with things. You can not know what you're doing and still kind of find a way to get to a point where you're gonna, still make a go of it. So I kept podcasting, because that first episode we posted on the net, and I started getting email from places like Australia. People saying, hey, that's really cool, that podcast you're doing. Here's, I asked for, at the end of my first podcast, I guess I was pretty optimistic, because I asked people to give me suggestions of who I should interview next. And then I thought, well, no one's going to listen to this. No one's going to email me back. But then people did start emailing me back, and I thought, wow, this is something else. So then I started podcasting, posting a podcast every single week. I was still working full-time at the press. I had 2 small children, and then I would stay up and record intros and exits and edit audio at like 2 in the morning. So you can imagine how these podcasts sounded, in the light of day, But the thing is, I started doing this, and this is about 2006. So this is before podcasting became really more mainstream. Now everyone knows what a podcast is for the most part. Do you guys know what a podcast is? Okay, people nodding their heads. It's like radio shows on the internet. Through iTunes, you can download all these things. And, so now, it was this situation where I started doing that. So I was still working as a print journalist. I had this podcast on the side. And I said to my bosses at the paper, I'm like, hey, we should start podcasting. And they were kind of like, okay, Jennifer, that's nice. You should go back to your desk and do the job we actually hired you to do. And it had nothing to do with art and craft and nothing to do with podcasting. I was actually covering higher ed at the time. And, but I really wanted to talk to people about art and craft and all this. And I'm a very, determined person. So I kept doing that on my own time. And, but it turned into the combination of the crafting on the side, the interviewing the people who were, making a name for themselves in that world. Because I was simultaneously working on 2 tracks, I wasn't getting nervous, as nervous as some of my colleagues about what was happening in the industry, because I already had started doing this other thing on the side. So I know the point of why we're all here today is to talk about writing. But one of the things I want to, you guys all need, no matter what industry you go into, writing is critical. To be able to write, you will advance in your job. You will be able to write compelling letters, even for people's birthdays. I have done things where I write them something, and it's not me being an egomaniac thinking I will just, behold a piece of writing on your birthday. It's not that kind of thing at all, but like when it's an anniversary or a milestone event, and you can interview some other people in the family and write something. It's one of those things where no one wants to give a eulogy at a funeral, but when you feel like you've trained your whole life to give a good one, it's a terrible experience. I didn't want to give a eulogy at my grandmother's funeral, but I felt like I had the skills. I sat at my laptop and I wrote something and then I read it. And I felt like, okay, this is one of those things where the job and the training and all those hours in a newsroom paid off for something I could do for my family. And, that has nothing to do with my job. It's not something that, you don't think I'm going to journalism school so I can write an obit, when someone dies that I know. But the thing is, I can do that, and I do that for my family when I need to. And it's not something that you want to do, but, if you're in a dispute, say a neighbor gets in your grill about something, and, they do something that you get the neighborhood association involved, and you're like, I'm not someone who like fights people. Like I don't physically fight people, and I don't scream at people either. But I can write a letter. If I need to defend myself, I can haul off with a nice letter, edit out all the inappropriate things, and, you write a nice letter, professional, and you fire it off, and you can solve your problems, if you have an issue, So sometimes writing, it's not just about, doing a professional writing job. If you can write and you can communicate, you're going to gain people's respect. You could actually get the guy or get the girl because you're a good writer. This is going to have life-changing experiences. My husband and I started dating, and then I moved to New York to do an internship at Newsday, and he was doing an internship in Muskegon at the Muskegon Chronicle, and we wrote letters, like old-fashioned letters through the mail, and got to know each other that way. And I probably was already in love with him, but that definitely didn't hurt, to have that correspondence. And what does that have to do with journalism? What does that have to do with and what do all these things I'm telling you have to do? And my students, I think, wonder this a lot in my class, because I tell a lot of stories. What does this have to do with our lives? And to bring that all home is like, as people on this planet, and you're also, many of you are students here, you're coming into these buildings on campus, you're fighting the traffic, you're trying, you're paying to park, and you're kind of like, okay, so what is this all adding up to? And I've had a lot of conversations with students about, what should I study, and do I even need a degree? What's happened with journalism, where the bottom fell out in journalism, is starting to happen a lot with higher education now, where there's so many people out there with degrees and people are struggling to find jobs, and the panic starts to set in. When you look at the student loans and you look at, how much you're paying to get your education, people start to freak out a little bit. And what I kind of try to always bring people back to is, you're here on this campus, you want to get an education. Education is really the key to a lot. It opens so many doors for people. It does have value, definitely has value, but what you need to do, though, is make sure that what you're studying, enjoy yourself along the way. Go with what you're curious about, what you're naturally curious about, are the things you need to pursue. I ask questions of people professionally. It's my job. But I've been asking people since I was very small, if you could do anything, what would you do? And that's my favorite question to ask people. If you could do anything with your life, what would you do? And that's a question that I think we don't ask ourselves enough. And I've definitely gone through professional ruts where I have thought, well, I guess this is as good as it gets. My quarter-life crisis, and that is a real thing. There's actually a book out on it. My quarter-life crisis, it's supposed to hit you about 25. Mine hit me about 22, and it lasted till I was about 29. So imagine my husband, what this must have been like for him, But it was one of those things where I was walking around and I was like, is this it? Is this as good as it gets? I had a decent job, and I had a job, and I had disposable income, and I had a couple kids, but I was kind of like, okay, well, is this it? And actually, I said the crisis ended. I misspoke. It did actually ended before I had children, because when I wanted to have children, I thought, well, I want to have children, so I will have children immediately. It didn't happen like that for me, and I went through a period of time where I didn't know if I'd actually be able to have children, and so I was a really angry little woman walking around for a while there, just kind of disgruntled reporter, worried about my future in the industry, and I kind of had to really kind of reconnect to little Jennifer, who used to, walk around as a kid asking people questions. And that journalism I started doing before I even knew what journalism was, asking people questions and having these conversations. And now I'm trained to tell people stories. And it's really fun to do. And, I think for the future of the industry, we're definitely going to still need people who can write. How many people in this room actually want to be a journalist? Okay, just my students here in the front. Okay, we have somebody else? Okay, we probably should talk afterwards, because I help advise the school paper, and we're recruiting here. So anybody who's interested in journalism, please stay after to talk to us. And I'm going to introduce you to the staff in just a second. One of the things, when you leave the room, really the message that I'd like you to leave with is really knowing that writing is a superpower, okay? If you can write and tell your story, you are going to be rock solid. Because if in any industry that you're in, the people that struggle to communicate their ideas, whether that's in the boardroom or when they're standing out in front, if there's a company that needs to give a speech to the media, or they're doing at a press conference, the people that can write something compelling and engage their audience are the folks that are going to get things done. And so you definitely, you're stronger with writing skills by all means. So we're going to do a little, yeah. All right, so we're, I don't know. Can you guys hear me? Okay. All right. Okay. Okay, so does anyone have any questions before I move on to tell you a little bit about what we do here on our campus with student media and journalism here on our campus? Does anybody have any questions about journalism or writing? No questions at all? All right, we'll try to think of some questions. And that's another thing, too, that when you are applying for jobs, and I'm just going to throw this out, this has nothing to do with really writing, but I'm going to throw this out there. When you're applying for jobs and the interviewer asks you, well, do you have any questions? Always have a question, okay? Always have a question. Because then they're going to know, okay, you're not just looking to be kind of told stuff. Have a question, engage them. Challenge them. I actually treat interviews like a job interview. When someone interviews me for a job, it's not really like they're interviewing me for a job. I interview them about the job and decide whether or not I want to have the job. That's how I treat it. And I'm not an arrogant person. I'm not thinking, oh, wow, I'm so fabulous, I'm going to interview them about it. It's not that at all. I really have to do research about, do I want to spend my time every day? Do I want to do this job? And that's really important for your life. So important, because how many of you know people who are in a job that they don't like? Okay? I think we all do. I've been that girl. I have been that girl where you kind of put your soul in the glove compartment, and then you walk kind of sadly in, sit in your desk, and do that sigh. I mean, it's ridiculous. It's ridiculous. But we have bills to pay. We need food. You can't go to a buyer and say, I'm a nice person going through a rough time. Can I get these vegetables for free? It doesn't work that way. So a lot of times we find ourselves in situations where we might not like what we're doing. So when you're in that job interview, ask questions. Do a little research ahead of time. And when you get to, if you're going to go to more of these speaker series, it might seem like, okay, you're getting credit for class. But try to push beyond that, because you might be talking to people who you wouldn't normally, go into the room, And maybe you wouldn't want to be here today to hear about journalism. I don't have an ego about this. I know that there's a lot of credit riding on people's attendance here. I get it. But the thing is, engage people that come onto this campus. Research, pick their brain, find out how they got hired, how did they get the job. I would stay after when people came to my college, or even job fairs at my high school. I stayed after and I asked questions, and I got a lot of opportunities. My first intern, or I did an unpaid internship at a local paper in Macomb County. It's kind of the equivalent of the Advance over here. It was very small, free publication, I went to a job fair, and the journalist was late, and I was a little perturbed, I admit. But I pulled up a chair, and I sat at the table that a journalist was supposed to come to. And she was late, and people were like, Jennifer, what are you doing? Why are you sitting at the table? I'm like, well, I'm waiting. When she gets here, I'm going to talk to her. And when she arrived late, and she, I think, felt a little bad about that. So she entertained me and all my questions. And before I walked away, I said, well, are there any internship opportunities at your paper? Now, I was in high school. I mean, I didn't have really any. I was 14. I didn't have any. I couldn't even drive. But I thought, well, I should get an internship at this place. And she was like, well, we don't normally hire people who can't drive, but I'll talk to the editor. And I said, well, at least could I job shadow? She's like, okay. And I admit, I was coming on a little strong. I really was planning to do this. And regardless, I think in my head, I just assumed she was going to go for it. And she did. She let me do a job shadow, and then I did a unpaid internship for a while. But again, I asked questions, and the doors open. So keep that in mind. No matter what you're going into, ask questions of people who are doing things that you want to do. It doesn't have to be a career in writing, but make sure you brush up on your writing, you work at it, polish it up, but then ask questions of the people that are doing what you want to do with your life. And if you're curious, I mean, I've never had a journalist come up to me, a budding journalist, someone ask me questions. I'm like, listen, I'm too busy podcasting and raising my children to talk to you. Like, I have never done that. I always say, oh, that's awesome. You want to go into what I do? It's flattering, when you go up to somebody, they might be a computer engineer, computer scientist, and they're like, hey, if you go up and say, hey, how did you get started? Where did you go to school? What would you have done differently? These are things that, do a little interview with that person. And in the job interview, don't think that you're just having to respond to questions. Ask some of your own. Okay, and so my students have kindly sat through all of this. And some of these stories they've already heard. So thank you, folks, for doing that. So here at Grand Rapids Community College, we have a newspaper called The Collegiate. And this is one of those jobs I didn't really actively apply to be the advisor. It's one of those things where I actually turned down the job in 2006. Someone had approached me about stepping in. At the time, I was a little overwhelmed, just getting my podcasting going. I had 2 little kids. The timing was not right. But then in 2012, the position was open again, and I wasn't looking for a job. And I thought, oh man, so much work. And but then I thought back to my own college experience and how awesome that was to be part of the school paper. It literally changed my life to be part of the school paper at Central. I got to be editor, and I got to meet some really cool people and interview great people and meet people that were going to be part of my life for a long time. My husband, I met him there. So this was a big experience for me. So I thought, you know what? I want to make sure that students at this college have an opportunity like the one I had. And of course, I can't replicate a 4-year university experience. I try really hard, but I'm kind of a one-woman show at the Collegiate as far as the leadership and the faculty level goes. But I have a staff of students, and we publish in print once a month, and then we do 3 print issues, and then we do, and I know you guys are probably curious about this story that keeps coming up here. We'll explain in a little bit here. So we do 3 print publications that are newspapers once each month. We post things daily online, and then we also do a magazine each semester. And this was the one that came out at the end of the spring semester. So fall and spring, we publish a magazine too, and that was something new that we've kind of added. So I'm going to have Josh, our editor-in-chief, just come up here for a second. So Josh, why don't you tell us a little bit about the mission of the paper and what you guys are attempting to do on a daily basis here on campus?
Well, the main thing in a sentence would be to try and inform the rest of the school as to what's going on. Obviously, nobody can be everywhere on the campus at once. It's a fairly big campus. We've got separate buildings in different places. So we try and coordinate reporters to go out and then collect the information and fill it out, try and get pictures for the website. And we do update the website. We've been managing for a few weeks now to update it every weekday. So we keep news flowing pretty well. I feel like we're short-staffed sometimes, though.
Yeah, it's a tough, it's a challenging thing. And I think one of the biggest challenges we have is I work with some of the bravest students on campus. And I'm not saying this because they already did their evaluations last class period, so this won't help me at all. But what I mean by that is that in all the classes that you take here, it's a very rare experience to be told, okay, you guys don't know a lot about journalism because this is a basic beginning journalism class that I teach in the fall. And I say, okay, we don't really know what we're doing yet, but we're going to publish something in 3 weeks. And they just kind of like, okay, and I just make like, this is going to go really smoothly. And we don't worry about what might not go smoothly or what would happen if it totally backfires. We just operate as if it's going to go really smoothly. And so far, things have gone smoothly, and we haven't had big problems. But it's the only class that you're going to take on this campus that you basically are performing in public. And I know the culinary program does do some of that because they're serving food to people. And if that goes wrong, that can be really bad too. So those students are pretty brave as well. But I'm asking my students to go out, edit or interview people on deadline, call people on campus who often do not want us to call them. Because if you are getting a call from an untrained journalist, and they're going to write down what you say and put it in the newspaper, and then your boss and the president of the college and the board is going to read it, that can be dangerous. That can be a little nerve-wracking for people. So a lot of times my students will call a source, and that source will say, sometimes the source gets upset and says, hey, you don't have permission from the communications department to call. And so, I'm working with the communications department because they know too that journalists don't need to ask permission from a public relations person to do a story. The people on campus, need to, sometimes get permission to talk, but that's not my students' responsibility to get that permission. So oftentimes they're calling and people are getting upset. And then they come back to me and say, well, why does everyone hate me? Like, why don't people want to talk to me? And it's not a matter of people not liking them. It's not a personal thing, but it's one of those things where really for us to be successful, we need the support from our fellow students. We need people to kind of look at our publication. We need professors and instructors and staff on campus to give us a chance. And I read everything before it goes in the paper. So there's nothing that goes in. And Josh, I've been very, very fortunate the last couple editors. I let them do what they think they need to do. My job is to keep them out of court. We don't want to be sued for anything libelous or slander. We don't want to do anything that's going to be, ruin someone's reputation, because journalism is a powerful tool, and we want to make sure we handle it responsibly. But at the same time, I give the students the freedom to do what they need to do. And Lauren, I'm going to have you step up for a second here. Lauren covers police and courts for us. And what has your experience been like, just as a student coming into this? What have you found this year to be, or just tell us about your experience.
Okay, take the double mic. Hi, everyone. My experience starting off, it was rough. It was hard. People don't take you very seriously when you're, just a student, and I'm this 5'4" little intimidated girl that why would you want to answer my questions? And so through the help of my dad, I don't like to name drop, but I had to use him a little bit to help me get into the court system and get in touch with prosecutors and all that stuff. So.
Well, and sometimes if you meet, somebody in a field, or you can use a connection that someone can just say, hey, she's okay to talk to. She's not going to screw up, And my role as advisor is to try to pave the way for students, so they know that people they're talking to know that I'm going to be a support system and try to prepare them for interviews, and then they go out and do their thing. But basically, we're having students pretty much ride a bike without training wheels, full blast down a hill. and they've never rode a bike before, you know. So that's kind of the analogy of what we're doing in the journalism program. And while it could be seem really terrifying to people, it's exhausting too. And I am in contact. I'm probably one of the only professors on campus who I have literally daily contact with my students. Not all of them every day, but every single day. That's Sundays and Saturdays too. I am responding to either a text message, an email, a phone call. So I get to know my students very well. We become more like maybe a dysfunctional family would be a good analogy by the end of the semester, because this really is something that I do full blast. I'm in a temporary part-time faculty position, so I clearly don't know how to work part-time or temporarily. I work all the time in full blast, but it's been a really fun experience. And Jessica, we're gonna have you come up for a second here. She's taking notes here. So Jessica, if you can talk a little bit about what your experience has been like, because you've done some interviews of some speakers who've come to campus. What have you liked about your experience writing for the campus newspaper?
Well, I'm very shy, so this was a new experience for me. I usually write stories, so journalism, the whole format, everything was completely different. And I tutor English, so this wasn't that difficult. I also proofread the newspaper, so that was the easiest, but when I started, I was overwhelmed because I only had one story to do, and I had to do interviews and stuff, and I was just sitting at my desk the first day, and I'm like, I can't do this. I need to quit this class. I need to find a different class. I don't know if she thinks I'm superhuman or I can't do this. And after like first 2 weeks, and I started to do art prize and interviews, it got easier, and it's almost natural now. I actually like journalism. I really didn't think I would. So it was pretty good.
All right, I didn't know she was about to quit, so I'm glad. I'm glad you stayed with us, Jessica. And actually, you know, her background is in English, and some of you might be English majors. And there is kind of like this shell shock period that people go through when they come into my class, because I basically say, okay, you've learned some things in your English classes, and I kind of want you to set that aside because we do it a little differently in journalism. Because we're not writing like novels, and you know, we can't write like these really long passages and use a lot of flowery language. And often journalists have to kill their best lines. When I write my column every week, I'll have like a line in there that I'm like, wow, this is a good one. And then my husband will sometimes, you know, say, hey, can you take a look at this? I'm like, especially that second paragraph, that's pretty good there. What do you think? And he's like, no, it has nothing to do with anything, just kill it. And I'll be like, you know, geez. And I look back and I'm like, you know, he's totally right. Because, and often, you know, you do have to just get rid of the stuff that you might think is just fantastic. Because in journalism, we got to get to the meat and potatoes of what we're trying to tell people, because they have limited time and we have limited space to tell them if it's going to go into print. Now we have Travis here. He's a budding sports reporter. And Travis, why don't you tell us a little bit about what it's been like to come in? Because I actually twisted Travis's arm a little bit to be here. So thank you for showing up, Travis. I appreciate that. So what has your experience been like?
My experience has been awesome. At first, it was a little overwhelming, I'll be honest. I'm taking 5 other classes, and having to go out and interview people is a little, I mean, got to worry about all the other stuff as well. But as I continued to do this, it's gotten so much easier. It's gotten so much fun. And, I mean, this is what I've wanted to do for quite a long time, and now that I'm fulfilling that, and I think I'm doing pretty well in, it is, it's pretty exciting. And I can't wait to continue to work my craft in this, and hopefully I get far with it. So.
Well, and that's one of the things, too, that's really fun for me. And if you guys want to, you guys can go ahead and sit down. It's been really fun because when I have several students, like the students you've heard from, and Travis in particular came in, and I know the first day, you know, he said, you know, I wanted to do this for, you know, my whole life, and I'm really happy to be here, and I'll do whatever it takes. And I'm like, wow, if I could clone this guy, you know, this would be great. But one of the things is you know, there's been challenges though. The first story he did, I mean, he ran into a lot of brick walls with it where people weren't calling back. It was kind of a struggle, but he's pushed through. And I think once I get the students to the point where they kind of let go of that belief that I could possibly be crazy, because I think after the first class period, people think, wow, she really seems to be I could just, you kind of just see people kind of blown away after the first, when I tell them how much work it's going to be and that it's going to be challenging. The people that come back to the next class, and this year we had a lot, I think we only lost one at first class, and and we kind of lay it out what it involves, and people have really come a long way, and it's really inspiring for me to see students come back and try again, even after someone might hang up on them or make them very upset by being rude about not answering questions. And we don't just see that. Sometimes professional authority figures that we expect to be kind and enabling and helping our newspaper, sometimes they don't. And it's hard for me sometimes to explain that to students. Like, why would someone at our school not help us? And it's hard to explain that. But I do what I can to kind of help them just kind of regroup and get out there and try again. And as far as for you guys, for the students, our website is thecollegiatelive.com. It's thecollegiatelive.com. And, this is what we're doing right now. But if you have suggestions of stories that you think, we should be doing, or if you want to get involved and get some writing experience, this is a great outlet. Even if you're not going into journalism, to learn how to write like a journalist is a good idea. In fact, Josh, unless he's changed his mind, are you going into journalism now, or?
Not yet.
Not yet. Okay, we're still working on him, but he's editor-in-chief, and he's not. His major is not journalism, so you do not have to be a journalism major. One of the selling points for this, why sometimes people get involved with student media, is it allows you to go behind the scenes. Whether you're going to see a theater production and you want to talk to the people backstage and hear what they have to say about it, or you want to cover sports and you want to hang out with talking to the players, talking to the coach. You want to hear the stories of, because when we go to a game and you watch it, you're like, okay, you watch this game, but you don't really know always like what goes into it and what kind of connection these people have to each other. All those stories that are really fun to be the one to find out and tell other people. That's a lot of fun. Our culinary program is fantastic here, and they have, there's TV shows about making meals and becoming, people who can become a master chef. There's people training for that here, and they're competing, and we get to go and go to those competitions and take pictures and interview the people who are involved, and it's really fun. Your experience here at the college can be enriched if you get involved in activities. It doesn't have to be the student newspaper, but we definitely are open to talking to anybody who might be interested in getting involved. But do you guys have any questions now about writing? Is there anything that you're curious about, or anything that you want to know about? You can ask the student editors here or myself.
So if print media is kind of becoming less popular.
Okay, here, let me bring this to you here. The double mic.
So if it's getting harder to find jobs since like newspapers are becoming less popular, what kind of jobs are out there to become?
Okay, in journalism?
Yeah.
Okay, so it's not a like the end of the world is not here kind of situation. Journalists are still finding jobs. The jobs now are, I know with MLive in town, we used to all work in a building together, and now the old press building, we used to have a printing press. When I got hired and I was sitting there, the presses would roll and my drink would, all our drinks would shake on our desk, your water would be sloshing around, and we could have that connection. The presses would roll downstairs, and then we built a printing press, a print location off-site. And then now the latest transition is MLive is where it's at, 24/7 news operation now. When I got hired, that wasn't the case. So at MLive, they're still hiring. And the thing is, you have to be able to not just write now for journalism. You have to be able to take pictures. You have to be able to record audio. You have to be able to take video as well. And you don't have to be a master at all those things, because clearly I am not a genius when it comes to recording, doing film production. That's not my strong suit at all. I take pictures that I publish every week in the paper, but I'm not excellent at that. That's not something that is my forte. I'm really a word person. So so to answer your question, if you want to go into journalism, you need to diversify your skills. The bottom line is you do need to be, if you want to be a writer, you want to write and do written content, whether it's online or print or whatever, and going forward, it's probably going to only be online in most cases. You want to make sure your writing skills are rock solid, but you also want to make sure that you're comfortable with cameras, you're comfortable recording audio, and you also need to be able to work quickly. And this is actually a great skill for college students. So I don't know if you guys have noticed that you've improved your time with writing papers for other classes. But I noticed that as a journalist, that was one of the things that helped me, is I got fast at writing. So I could do my research and write fast. And so it helped me in other classes when I had a 10-page paper due or 20-page paper, I could kick it out quickly. But to answer your question, I mean, you want to have good speed. You want to work quickly, you want to be accurate, but there are still jobs. I mean, a lot of people are working for websites, doing the content, collecting content for the website. There's still production where people are having to manage that content. Social media is a big part of that too. You have to be comfortable with your social media. So when you write a story, you can say, hey, check out my story on MLive, and you're linking from your Facebook page. You have to be comfortable also with Twitter. The more comfortable you are with social media, the better as far as employers are concerned, because it's all about getting people to the website and getting people to your story. So there still are jobs, and people are still writing. It's just for the internet more now than in print. So, so yeah, I don't know if does that answer your question? All right. Any other questions? Anybody else have a question about journalism or writing or the collegiate?
I was just wondering if you think an internship is still necessary.
Yes.
For the first step.
Yes, internships are definitely necessary. I know at the Grand Rapids Press, they pretty much have a policy that they've had since I started out there. They don't typically hire people who have had no other experience writing for papers. So I started out, when I started my career, I started out at a really small paper, and I worked for free starting out. Don't get caught in a rut, though, where you're working for free for a long time. There comes a point where people deserve to be paid. So I would always try to get a paid internship first. But it's fine to start out doing an unpaid internship to kind of get your foot in the door. The students that work at the collegiate, every time they write a story, they add something to what we call the clip file. So it's a file of stories that now has become digital, but they can send the link to, if they apply for a job or an internship, they can send a list of links of their story, the stories they published for the collegiate, and people can look at them online. But you need to get some experience in the field, because it does two things. First, you get some experience, you meet people in the field, but also it gives you a chance to figure out, do I like this? Because if you build up and get a degree in something and you haven't had any practical experience in it, I would not want to find out after 4 years or 5 years and thousands of dollars that it might not be what you want. So definitely go after those internship opportunities. And I can tell you, if you're wanting to go into journalism, working at the school paper is a great way to get those internship opportunities. So even if you're not going to be a journalist, if you have your area of your major, find out what clubs on campus or student groups are focusing on your major, and get involved with those groups, because that networking experience, meeting the advisor who might be connected professionally to people in the field, you want to make those connections. People frequently will call us over at the collegiate. I get calls a lot from recruiters, people who are looking to hire people. We've placed a couple students from the collegiate over at MLive. So we've had our students get hired at MLive. We have a couple students working in their sports department, and that's been really fun to see people start out at the school paper and then get that opportunity. But if I don't know you and I haven't had you be part of our organization, then I can't recommend you. So if you're out there and you're wanting to be a journalist, come and meet us, because I'm happy to help place students, but I have to know who you are so I can tell people about you and your work. So the internship's definitely something you need to do. Any other questions? Okay, well, I think with that, we've filled our time here, and I hope that you guys were able to glean some information that will be useful in your career. And I just want to leave you with the one question. Often reflect on, if you could do anything with your life, what would you do? Think about that and make that your guiding principle, okay? Good luck to you all. If you have questions, I'll be up here.